Path of Exile 2 can be a pretty brutal game, especially early game for squishy classes. You don't have many options available to you yet, and enemies hit like trucks. And that's why I thought I'd start sharing my builds with you and creating a list of guides for you to refer back to as you progress through the game. As you'll know from my community polls, my favourite class is Witch. I could not wait to get my hands on this minion spamming maniac, with the ability to summon upwards of 100 minions in the late game, a true skeleton horde. It's a dream come true for me as a lover of games like Dungeon Keeper and Overlord, but I digress. The reason I bring this up is that you also voted the Witch your favourite in the community polls, so it made perfect sense to start focusing on builds for her first. And just quickly, one more thing before we jump into the guide itself. Please note, I'm not going to pretend this is the absolute best build in the world. And honestly, if anyone tries to claim that the build that they're showing you is, they're lying. Of course it's not. The game's been out in early access for like 2 days by the point of recording this, and it's going to be months before people find out the best builds. And also, before you come at me for the title of the video, I'm sorry, but you know you've always got to put something a little bit catchy nowadays to feed the algorithm, or it just won't get shown to anyone. And I truly do genuinely believe this build is going to help out a lot of people. So with what I've just said taken into consideration, here's why I believe this video is genuinely going to help out a lot of people and show off a crazy powerful early game witch build. Most builds you're going to see will probably require you to have such specific gems and items that they're very difficult to pull off, at least in the early game, because 99.9% of the loot in this game is completely RNG. Whereas I'm going to do things a little differently for you by giving you guidelines to pull this off no matter how lucky or unlucky you get with your gear. We'll be looking at skill gems, support gems, passive perks, gear, and even general combat tips to help you really nail every aspect of the early game minion-focused witch build and destroy the end of Act 1 boss first try, no matter how the RNG gods treat you. So now that we can get into the build, let's start by talking about the skills that you want to unlock first with your uncut skill gems. This is your bread and butter because no matter what stats and passives and gear you have, it's all irrelevant if you cannot physically use the abilities that I'm going to advise for you to use for this build. So there's a few ways that you can unlock new skills, but primarily you will find different levels of uncut skill gems. You'll interact with them in your inventory and that will let you unlock a new skill. And I got pretty damn unlucky with my drops. I had a terrible Act 1, so you can probably replicate this build even better than I did. And the first 4 abilities you absolutely want to unlock are Skeletal Snipers, Contagion, Essence Drain, and either Unearth or Raise Zombie. Now I'll talk you through how to most efficiently use these 4 abilities to build up your undead horde, before then showing you some good support gems to synergize with them if you're lucky enough to have a few support gems drop for you. Firstly, one of your big damage dealers early on in the game with a minion heavy build is your Skeletal Snipers. As long as you keep them alive with their gas stripping away enemies' armor and their arrows annihilating them from afar, they are going to rack up some great damage against hordes and single targets alike, as long as you protect them with either your bone constructs from Unearth or your zombies from Raise Zombie. And I'll talk about that in just a second. Next up is Essence Drain. Essence Drain is a great mid-range damage over time against single targets, which is really good in long boss encounters, because this will keep dealing damage for you so that you can focus on dodging and not dying. And if you combine this with Contagion, this will spread like wildfire and melt through an entire horde of enemies in an instant, especially if you've thrown in a few gas arrows from your snipers as well. And finally, we've got Unearth or Raise Zombie. This is your early game corpse spender and will turn your enemies' lifeless bodies into your allies. This is where most of your damage will come from, because even early game you can have around 8 to 10 bone constructs or zombies running around with you. And even though initially they only last for around 20 seconds, if you are blitzing through packs of mobs quickly, that's easily enough time to clear the next pack and then resurrect them all again as the timer is running out on your initial pack of minions. That's the main rotation of this build for clearing most of the mobs in zones. I'm now going to share some details for you in the form of support gems and passive skills. Then I will give you the boss strategy you should be using, because this build definitely shines against multi-target, but it's still good enough against big solo bosses. Now, support gems are definitely harder to come by early game, so you may only get 1 or 2 of these. I know I literally only had the 1. but I will advise for you the best support gem you should assign to each of the 5 skills I just talked about, and you allocate it to whichever one you feel will most benefit you based on your gear. Firstly, for skeletal snipers, the one I absolutely recommend is Corrosion. Unlocking this means that the poison applied by their poison arrows will also break the enemy's armor, which is amazing. It's going to make you rack up so much damage, especially on bosses once that armor is broken, as long as you stagger the arrows and keep it broken throughout the entire fight, which we'll talk about later. It's very easy to do. And in no particular order, next up, regardless of whether you decide to use Unearth and use the Bone Constructs or use Raise Zombies, the support gem I would recommend is Minion Instability. Early game, both of these minions are very, very weak and they will be dying all the time, so you may as well have them violently explode, dealing 15% of their max life to all surrounding enemies every single time one of them is reduced to low life. Next up, for Essence Drain, I recommend Persistence. Please note, I would love to have Persistence for both Essence Drain and Contagion, but if you're using a support gem in one skill, you can't also use it in another skill. So we're going to have Persistence on Essence Drain, so that the ticks last longer on bosses, and you're not having to remember to reapply this quite as often, because it does have quite a short duration of, I believe, 4 seconds at baseline. And then talking of Contagion, the one I have applied I actually really don't like. I'm actually going to sort this out straight away as soon as I finish the video. I would recommend you having Magnified Effect. Supported skills have 40% more area of effect, meaning Contagion is going to spread further and faster than ever before. Applying Essence Drain in such a wide area, bursting down enemies with various dots so fast. And sorry, you probably are familiar with RPG terms, but if you're not, DOT just stands for damage over time. Sometimes I use these because I've been an RPG and an MMO fan all my life. I just reel off heart and dart and all these different terms that I realize now some people might not know what they are. But yeah, DOT, damage over time, HOT, heal over time, and so on and so forth. That is all you need for the support gems. I'm not going to give you a fully exhaustive list because this is an Act 1 guide. I will be bringing out class guides for Act 2, Act 3 and beyond as the weeks and months progress. I don't want to bombard you with them all now before you are ready. So as we now move into passive skills and a few more gameplay tips, please let me know down in the comments if you enjoy this style of the build, if there's anything you'd like me to change, because I'll be doing loads and loads of builds, and also let me know which ones you would like to see next. I'll try and focus on the most upvoted build requests first, so that I know I'm helping out as many people as possible. And now for my favorite bit, the passive skill tree. You can ignore the bit in the center, you won't have this yet. This is just because I've reached my ascendancy, but I'll talk about that in the Act 2 build. And honestly, until you get to around level 20, there is very, very little variety in builds. It's very straightforward, very hard to get this wrong. Basically, you just want to select any perk that's going to increase the efficiency of your minions. So let me talk you through that right now. You're just going to be going directly up the middle. And firstly, up the left-hand side, you're taking all the spell and minion damage until you get to Raw Destruction. This one's going to increase your spell and minion damage even more and give you 10 intelligence. Now carry on going up the tree, and I actually went to the right-hand side here to increase my chaos damage. Wouldn't advise this for you. We're going to change it ever so slightly. And you're actually going to go straight through the middle of the tree instead, because this is going to increase your minions damage significantly, which is far better for you for the early game version of this build. So get the minion damage, then get the power of the dead, and then get one more minion damage just above that. As for the tree on the right, you're going to start out with the only thing you can take, the energy shield, and then at the start just keep increasing your energy shield. Plus 10 to the maximum, plus 10 to the maximum, and then another 15%, another 15%, and then grab pure energy. The reason for this is because we do not really have any struggles with mana early game, so increasing your survivability and making your main character more tanky is definitely advisable. After pure energy, you're going to go down the right hand side and grab the minion life, then living death for even more life and faster revive time, and then I believe just before you hit the Act 1 boss you should be level 17, and I think you'll have 1 skill point remaining, so you may as well grab plus 5 to your intelligence. If you do have any more, you can start making your way over to the right, where I have also grabbed plus 5 dex. This is just because I'm wearing a bit of dex int armor and I needed that extra 5 to be able to wield some gloves that I found that I really like. But obviously with these +5 to any attribute squares, just choose whichever one is going to benefit you most at the time, and then if you want to change them later on, you can go and speak to the hooded one and do that. That's what the early game build is going to look like. Passive skill tree wise, very self-explanatory. Just go directly up, grabbing every single node that talks about minions. And then later on, I'll just show you a quick sneak peek of how powerful your minions can get into the late game. All we're going to do is just search the word minion here, and you can see the big clusters that all light up when we search for minions. And after I finish fleshing out the cluster that I'm currently working on, there are some absolutely insane abilities later on in the tree. Just to name a few, you've got a 22% increase to all elemental resistances up at the top right here. Then as you work your way over to the other side, loads of crit damage increase, loads of crit bonus increase, life steal, amulet buffs applied to your minions, 40% increased damage, 40% increased crit chance. Honestly, your minions get absolutely crazy as you start to flesh out this tree, and I cannot wait to show you some Act 2 and some Act 3 and even some properly late game builds with this tree fully fleshed out. Anyway, enough swooning over the awesomeness of the passive skill tree. Let me now give you some boss tips, specifically how to beat the end of Act 1 boss, and then we'll also look at what gear you should be focusing on. Now for some boss tips. I've recorded a few boss fights for this video to show you that it doesn't just work on this guy. This strat is pretty foolproof for basically any boss, as long as you obviously learn the strats and don't die. So for the Mad Wolf of Ogden boss fight, here is a few tips to help you get through it. And honestly, this can be applied to pretty much every boss. The first thing you want to do, depending on how many skeletal snipers you've got, and we'll talk about how to maximize them in the gear section of the video, is you want to spam down all of your poison arrows immediately to start burning away the armor. Then once the armor has broken, it will turn from a number into this symbol, meaning you have successfully broken the armor. And you now want to remember to stagger the arrows to keep that armor broken. As long as the boss remains under a poison effect and isn't out of a poison cloud for too long, the armor will now remain broken for the rest of the fight, meaning you do a lot more damage. You're then going to apply Essence Drain and basically just focus on dodging and staying alive and keeping your shield up, whilst occasionally getting in a basic attack of whatever your weapon of choice is. Then as for the strats for this specific boss, where your big damage will come in is actually once you have defeated phase 1 and he's turned into this big wolfy abomination with a giant maw coming out of his stomach. He does one attack that basically makes the rest of this fight an insta-win. He will fill the arena with an icy mist and you have to stay in a specific section or you will take big damage over time and swiftly die. He will also now start to spawn lots of adds. And it's here where Raise, Zombie, or Unearth come into play. Keep spamming these attacks because even though the enemies that he spawns don't leave corpses, if you hit them with one of these attacks, the second they start dying, they will turn into a zombie or a bone construct. Not only will that make this section of the fight so much easier because you've now got loads of adds of your own fighting his adds, it means that when he stops jumping in and out of the mist every 4 seconds, which you want to mentally count in your head and roll out of the way, by the way, when he stops doing this, you now have a horde of minions and they are going to mob him and start doing so much damage. So if you're good at this, just 2 cycles of this, you will melt his health bar and you'll have him down in no time. This strategy can basically be applied to all early game bosses. Just focus more on your survivability and occasionally casting Essence Drain, and then your skeletal snipers and their gas will do most of the work for you. And then whenever you see any adds spawn, just think of that as lots of yummy extra damage from your bone constructs and your zombies. And it's as simple as that. Now that you know how to deal with the giant groups of enemies throughout all of the stages in Path of Exile 2, and also how to deal with bosses, let's look at the gear and specifically the stats that you should be looking out for and focusing on to bring this whole build together. Your gear is definitely going to be the most random and sporadic of the whole build, so I'll just advise you on certain stats and abilities you should try and look out for. Firstly, to get the most amount of minions, you definitely want a scepter, because this is the best way early game to increase your spirit, and the more spirit you have, the more minions you can have. On top of that, I like to use a wand, because it usually comes with an ability you can spam, such as Chaos Bolt or Bone Blast. However, because you'll also be spamming the likes of Unearth or Essence Drain, you could actually opt for a shield in your main hand for that extra survivability and defense, because most of your damage will be coming from your minions, so that's something to keep in mind as well. As for secondary stats on your two weapons, obviously anything that's going to increase yours or your minions' damage will be perfect. And on the scepter, I really like the scepters that grant you the skeletal warrior skill, because you've just got a little bit more defense at the start of fights before you can build up your zombies and your constructs. Next up, you're not likely to have all of your gear, so you'll be lucky if you get a ring. You'll be even luckier if you get an amulet or a belt. But if you do, you're looking for maximum mana, maximum life, cast speed, plus intelligence, maybe even life regen if you're lucky. Anything that's going to help you survive long, continuous engagements, because your damage is very slow and steady at the start of the game, especially in encounters where you can't constantly summon your hordes of minions. But especially with an increased energy shield, you will offset a lot of this, because you've effectively got a free extra health bar on top of your health bar. And because of that, you want to make sure that most of your actual armor, such as your chest, boots, gloves, and helm, are focused on energy shield rather than actual armor. And if you get very lucky, you might even get a piece of armor that increases your maximum spirit, meaning you might be able to field one more skeletal sniper. That's the main stuff you want to look out for your gear. I don't want to get any more specific than that, because if I get too niche, it will just be impossible for you to follow the guide, because early game, as I say, it's all RNG. And with that, my friends, that build will easily blitz you through Act 1, and if you just follow the same build and just upgrade it and continue improving it, use skill gems to get the 5 abilities I've just talked about to level 6 or level 7, and just keep focusing on more of the same, it will help you blitz through pretty much all of Act 2 as well. But make sure you subscribe and watch this space, because I'll be bringing out plenty more build guides and other Path of Exile guides as well in the coming days and weeks. And with that, my friends, all that's left for me to say is thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.